Would you like to tell us what you're representing here today?
Sure. Well, camp followers, she was.
Yes.
But what I usually do is I portray a woman who actually existed and housed General Washington in her home.
And who was that?
Her name is Ann Fisher Miller,
Uh-huh.
and she was down in North Castle in New York. So the Battle of White Plains actually ended on her farm. And General Washington was there in 76, and 78, and then 80 again. And she lost her husband and 2 sons to the war and continued to fight for liberty. And
Wonderful.
supported the troops.
Wonderful.
And it's a lot of fun to learn about somebody.
It is someone real.
It was like, because it's so incredibly different from what we have now.
Very different. Just getting dressed for both of us today, right?
It's quite a task.
It really is. It really is a task getting dressed.
If you were a New York City lady, you probably bought all of your fine fabrics.
Yeah.
Where we were on the farm, we probably made most
Yes,
of ours.
yes.
So you started from the wool or the linen,
Right.
and you made your way all the way to something which probably was the only one thing that you had.
Right, one nice thing.
One nice thing, and then an apron to cover it.
The woman I play, Mrs. Q, she and her husband are merchants, and she sells fabric, but of course she has a dressmaker who
Yes.
makes all of her dresses for her and would be dressed in, she's dressed very New York City for an army camp today.
I'm actually dressed nicer than
You
I
are
would
dressed
be.
very nicely, yes,
Yeah.
you are.
If I had
Would this
been-
be one of her nicer pieces? One of her nicer
It
outfits?
probably would. The bottom would always be the same. You have your layers and
Right.
things and your shoes and
Right.
all that. And of course, no buckles because we gave away all the medals.
For the medal.
Down
To
you
ties.
ribbons. And you'd layer up whatever you had. Cotton, by the time the war came, we didn't have cotton anymore because it came from the south and you couldn't get that. So you were down to linen and wool,
Yes,
or linsey woolsey if you made
right,
that.
right, right,
And you had
right.
to start with your own sheep or your own flax.
Wow,
And work your way through from
this.
from dirty wool to clean wool to, if you were lucky, you got down to a pair of stockings for the gentleman.
Oh my goodness.
But most of the time, you had a lot of children who did a lot of that.
Who
work.
did some of the did the chores?
Anne had 7 children and only lost the 2 to the war, and the rest.
Lived fully to adulthood?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Another woman who I portray, Abigail Purdy, she had 12. She didn't lose any. And
Wow.
it's very interesting that people think you lost a lot of children, and I think in some places you may have. But in Westchester, all the families that I've researched really didn't seem to lose children at a young age. So I don't know if it was a healthy place that they lived, good food, or luck.
I've noticed that too, that some families have high survival rates for their children and others do not. I always wondered if it's a genetic type of thing or where they live or what they consume or maybe what they did for lifestyle, what they did for a
In
living.
the city, if someone got sick, everyone got sick.
But people had their country homes, some as far as here, that they would retreat to at a time when anything contagious was going on in the city. I was joking on the way here with Mr. Q about having to put on shoes first, because once your stays are in place, you can no longer bend over to get to the shoes.
Straight-laced ladies.
So right, so you could not bend at the waist anymore. And I wear stays, but I was watching a demonstration with a lady who was also wearing a busk,
Yes.
keeping her very erect and straight, which many of the more, wealthy ladies would do as part of that look that they maintained with a very conical shape and very
it gave
straight.
me the shape that people wanted.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of practical use to it because it's basically a back brace. And when you're stayed in there, there's some things you can't do, but you rarely throw your back out. And these women worked from sun up to sundown.
Right,
Like they said, man works from sun to sun and women's work is never done.
Right.
It's true.
right.
They worked outside, and if the sun wasn't up, they didn't have anything to do.
And they do provide quite a lot of support.
They do.
Yes.
Not terribly comfortable. You get used to it.
You do. You do.
And it was what they were used to. But
Right.
I think it was a practical thing.
I think so too. And you can see the difference with the working ladies and the way they wore their stays and their work clothes versus the gentle ladies and the way they wore their stays and their dresses. So it really has a functional purpose as for some ladies and a decorative purpose for other ladies.
Things evolve.
Yes. But fashion always is crazy for women. Even then.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort.
Even then.
This would be more simple, but usually what I have is something like what you have. So you bustle up the back, and you have extra layers underneath,
Pillow.
and then you have things over the top for
The
modesty.
pillow, right?
Yeah.
The layers of petticoats. Yes. But it's fun once in a while to put the whole thing on.
I feel more comfortable wearing this than I feel in most other things.
I'm working on curling and powdering one of my wigs in the big 1790s fashion. So I'm hoping.
That was very much a city lady thing.
Yes, the curling, homemade powder, poof. So I'm trying it with one of my wigs. We'll see how it comes out. I know there are women who do it with their own hair.
Pearls in there too.
Yeah, maybe a ship or a cannon, right?
Well, the ladies used to hide things in their hair.
Right.
Because you could never ask a lady to undo anything. You couldn't ask her to take off a hat or anything else. So you could hide all kinds of secret messages in there.
And those got pretty big.
In fact, Ann Miller, two of her daughters, said that in 1780, when General Washington was there, he asked them to carry a message to one of the other camps.
And
The family lore is that they did. No one's quite sure how, but they did. They were 10 and 14 at the time.
This is cute. Can you ask the young lady about the pendant around her neck?
I will. That is a lovely pendant you're wearing. Would you like to tell us about it?
Handed down from my mother.
Wonderful.
The ladies didn't. I would not probably have had jewelry left at that time because, again, if it was metal, it was gone.
It was gone.
And in fact, the British came into her house a few times and took a lot of things.
Yes,
So-
that is something people don't realize today either, that the British soldiers here felt that this was the property of the crown and that they had the right to everything, and that if they sought to occupy your home, the home belonged to the king, and they could do that, and you could stay and serve them or you could leave.
That's one of the things about Ann Miller. We actually wanted to prove she was a patriot in her own right, which is difficult to do because men have muster rolls and there are records, and
Right.
women they don't.
Right.
So I had to prove that she not only housed General Washington, but did so by choice, because they could come in from either side, nest in your house, either put you out or not put you out.
Sure.
And there wasn't a lot you could do about it because, in this case, to be what they called a rebel would be to lose your life. If the British came, a woman as well could be put to death for standing against the king.
Or if they have a Nintendo
And
Switch like Michael
they
does.
called us rebels, but rebellions are put down. We were revolutionaries.
We
because
were.
revolutions are won.
We were.
Doing his virtual.
We were. Do you spin?
I don't.
You don't?
I do some hand spinning, but I haven't yet gotten to the wheel because I can't take it with me.
It's fascinating to me that this becomes that.
What I love is when we have kids who come and you explain to them, first of all, that they had to raise the sheep to begin with.
Right,
First
that's
you had
right.
to have a sheep, raise the sheep, and then, where are they? Somewhere I have. This is worth seeing. Because if you wanted to know what it took to get from one thing to another,
I imagine one of the hardest things I never
first you had to raise the sheep. Then you had to
Are these
shear
the shears?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So, once you sheared all the wool off,
That in itself is such a difficult job to.
it probably would have been my sons who would have done that. But once the wool came off and it was filthy and dirty, and this is washed actually several times already, but it comes off, on the back end of a sheep. So the girls would take it down to the river and they'd wash it, beat it against a rock, dry it, wash it, dry it, wash it. And then the little ones, as young as 4 or 5, their job would be to pick out all the little bits and put them aside until it was fairly clean. And then you had to straighten it. So you'd take a little and you'd put it on and you'd work your way like this until you had little rolls of straightened fibers. And then you would start to spin them into something which, if you have a drop spindle like this, you can do. Where literally you just spin and you twist and you spin and you twist. And once you have the yarn and you get it like this, it'll untwist the minute that you take it off of that. So the girls would have to take it again in a twist down to the river, wet it, beat it against a rock, dry it, slam it against the rock, and set the twist to the yarn. Then once you had that, now you could take it and have it loomed into something. And once it was loomed, which actually was sort of an industry, not too many people would have a loom. She has a box loom, which you can see. So for smaller things like straps, you could make it. But if you wanted a big piece of wool, you'd take it to someone who'd probably loom it for you. And exchange, you'd give them some wool as your barter.
Payment, right.
And then it would come back. Now you could make something out of it like a petticoat. So months have gone by. Everyone in the house has had a task in it, from your little ones to your older ones. And then now you can go ahead and make something. So what you had was probably one woolen petticoat, which surprisingly you would think was a winter thing. You would wear that in the summer when you were inside by the hearth because it was less likely to catch fire. And a lot of women caught fire while they were cooking around the hearth.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that. Because if you've got this and you're leaning into an open hearth,
Sure,
even
the
a
sparks,
spark, when
right.
it's on cotton,
Right.
will burn. But wool, it will burn a hole through and then sort of go out. So you would wear your woolen petticoat more often than you would think.
So I'm thinking about that. Early industry required to uniform an army.
It was incredible.
I'm thinking about it now, looking at all of the steps that everything goes through and the number of people it required to.
And they left home with what they had on. They carried everything with them. And when something was torn, they would sew it.
They would
or
mend
sew
it.
for them. Nothing was ever thrown away. If a soldier died or if you had leftover clothing, you would
They were
keep it
reused.
so that you could cut it together, use it for patching. Sometimes you'll see they'll come. In fact, the gentleman over there has one that he has been using for 50 years in reenacting, and he's been patching it.
And the
it's
ladies,
very much an example.
the ladies remade their dresses as well.
Yes.
We see dresses in museums where you can tell that the same fabric, they'll let them out, let them in, or they've changed the shape to a more fashionable shape after they've worn it because fabrics were valuable. And you wouldn't take something like this and just, oh, it's not fashionable, I no longer desire the color, I'll just throw it away. You would make this into maybe something for someone else in the family or make it into something else for yourself.
Yeah, they reworked a lot of things.
I didn't throw things away the way we do
They threw
today.
nothing away.
Everything would be reused in some way.
I have an inventory from my great-great-great-grandfather who fought in the Revolutionary War.
So are you a DAR?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Jamestown as well. I had people in Jamestown.
Really? Oh, that's wonderful.
So in his inventory, which was about 3 pages long, there was a broken looking glass, a broken cup. So nothing was thrown away because you reuse it for something else.
I've read some like that of an inventory of when someone died, and you'll see strange things like that. 3 forks,
Yes.
2 cups. And to us, it seems all mismatched. Why would you have? Because that's what they had.
They did, and we're used to a place setting.
Right.
Where you have 4, 6, 12 people. They probably never had 4. They maybe had 2 of anything, cups, plates, and things like that. Families didn't eat together. The children ate and they went off to bed or do their tasks. The men would come in, probably the father and some of the older sons might sit together at a table, but they may not even. The women rarely sat with the men because they were eating it while they were cooking.
Right, right.
And the whole concept that we have of a meal is something that they
Different.
didn't have. It's much like this. You want something, get something. You didn't go back to what you were doing. And even the things that they ate with were different. Everywhere that I travel, I have a basket and I bring these things with me. Because if I went to somebody's house, I can't expect that they have an extra plate and everything else to go with it.
Fascinating. So when you traveled, you would bring.
Yeah,
Your
wherever I
own.
go, I bring a basket. And even at these events, sometimes we'll have somebody who brings food or makes a stew. They don't have the bowls for it, so we bring our things over, and they serve us, and we sit and we eat what we have.
What did soldiers? So did soldiers carry their own bowls and spoons and knives? Yes.
In fact, right now, you can take any one of these gentlemen,
And
they
they'll
can
have it
what
in their
they
bag?
need. Usually it's a wooden bowl, because the metal bowls were heavier.
Right.
And they also conduct the heat, so a hot stew would start to, sometimes it's nice, but sometimes
Right.
it's not. But yeah, they would have something just like this, where it was all
A kit.
up and tied. You'd have a spoon. In fact, what do you think the spoon's made from?
This looks like it's some sort of shell or bone or.
We made all of these things on the farm. So you can make a comb, you
Right,
can even make a bowl,
right.
or a powder horn, because that's what it's made from, is horn.
It is, it's horn.
Nothing was wasted. So at the end of the year, when we would take down the animals for meat, the skins were used and all of those
Right.
things. But horn was very, very useful.
And they're
because-
beautiful.
Yeah, and it works really well.
The bowl is very
This
beautiful
is the only spoon I have, because my metal spoons I gave to the soldiers to melt down.
to melt down.
But you would keep a knife and a fork, and they look incredibly different from what you're used to.
Yes.
This is as sharp because the meat wasn't really very good.
Mm-hmm.
So you can stab through almost anything with this, but if you eat on it, you're going to poke your lip. It's the way we see Europeans sometimes.
Right.
What they would do is they would cut, but you eat off of the knife. So most things were sort of mixed together when they'd be eaten off of the knife, so you would just be doing it this way, or with a spoon. But everything was different, and the handles would be bone.
Bone.
Or ivory if you're in the city. And you would have place settings in the city.
Yes,
I'm
and
sure.
China, imported China
Right.
and all sorts of things, yes.
Occasionally we would have a China type bowl. But again, if it broke, that was it. It was gone. But you would
Wow.
find them still being saved and used for something.
Wow.
Something just because it was pretty enough.
Such a different society than what we're used to today, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
There
With
was
everyone
none of
busy.
everything.
And of course, if you made everything, it was more valuable to you as well.
Yeah.
Because you recognized the amount of work that went into the making of an object like a bowl.
And it's an interesting way that they do it. They would boil the horn to make it soft, and then slice it, and it's malleable. And, you
And then
press
form it?
into a wooden mold that you had for a spoon or something. And once it's set up, there you are.
Did it come out shiny like this, or is this some sort of finishing they would, some sort
I
of
think they
buffing
polished
or polishing? Because that is really
This
beautiful.
one is really very old.
Yeah.
But I have one horn which hasn't been touched.
And the hair comb is very pretty as well.
Yeah. So that's something you would have had, where
Right.
it's more for decoration
Right.
than anything else. But this is one that would be practical and just used for actually combing your hair. But you can see there's a fairly good shine on it.
This one is very pretty
Before
too.
It's been processed.
Yeah.
And that would be something the boys would do. They'd start a fire outside in a kettle because they stink. They stink real bad when you boil them. And then you could make all number of things from it.
Wow. And we're so used to going to the supermarket and just buying food already packaged and having no idea what happens to the rest of the animal, where at that time the value of a farm animal must have been enormous because it was used for so many
Every
things.
single thing was used. The bone would be used sometimes for making certain kinds of needles, like a bodkin, where you would use it to stitch through,
Right.
not sew, but to lace through.
Right, right.
We'd make buttons for the gentleman out of it, and all kinds of other little things, handles for things. So the bone was used, the horn, the skin,
Of course.
and the meat.
Of course.
And even the internal organs, some portions, we'd make the candles out of the tallow.
Right, right, right.
And people think that it was made from all the fat. The tallow is a particular kind of fat that's only around certain of the organs, so you had to cut that loose, and then you had to boil that down and take out the bits, and then you'd start making your candles. So every little thing took effort,
Right.
and all of the children had a task to do. And the candles, if you were lucky enough to actually have a candle mold, it would be faster than the dip, dip, dip. But some
Right,
people
right,
had to
just
do the
dipped.
dipping. And it took, in a little house like ours, about 400 candles a year. So you had to have at least a stockpile of 400 candles
Wow.
to make it through the seasons. And, you know, it's everybody's effort.
Wow.
And you see a lot of people in movies, and they're walking around with candles, and they have candles all over. If you burned one, it was to get from here to there.
Right, I would say that seems wasteful
It would have
with
been.
all of the effort to make them, or the expense, if you were someone like me buying them,
Right.
the great expense to buy them.
And you probably have nice beeswax ones that
that-
smelled better when they
Right,
burned than
right,
what we were burning.
right, but still the expense, so one would be careful
Yeah.
about the use.
You know, once it got dark, you were pretty much done with your day. Not the woman. The mother would still be going. But everyone else was tucked down, and it got cold, and you didn't burn a fire for excessive reasons.
Right, right. I remember people having an idea that every room or every bedroom in the house would have some sort of fireplace, and then touring an old home and seeing that maybe there's a big fireplace in the kitchen, and if someone was wealthy, maybe a secondary fireplace in a sitting room, and that everyone spent their time around that hearth and that large
Yeah.
fireplace in the winter because it was warm.
And once it was time to go to bed, the beds had the curtains around them,
Right.
which we think is for decoration. It was to keep the body heated.
Right.
So you would get in, and very often your children would be sleeping in there with you, and you'd fill that little cocoon with people and try to keep warm. And the fire didn't burn all night either because wood. there's
Waste,
another
it's another wasteful.
You had to fell the tree and
Right,
cut it, and,
right.
and they didn't have power tools to do that.
Right.
That's what sons were for,
Right, chopping wood.
chopping wood.
So and very cold here in the Hudson Valley, something that would surprise the British when they came, who were not used to the very cold northern temperatures or the very swamp-like deeper south temperatures.
Yes, yeah.
So something else for them to,
Life was a constant battle to keep yourself fed, warm, and clothed.
but still worth fighting for independence for.
Absolutely.
The ability to do that,
We were willing to risk our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to do it.
to be independent in our own nation. Thank you.
Ann Miller was born as a British citizen, and she died
An American, and I'm
And I
sure
love
she was so proud that she died an American.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Enjoy.
Thank you.